The United States, in the mid-19th century, was a nation of stark contrasts. This period was marked by rapid changes and growing tensions that would eventually lead to one of the most defining conflicts in American history. The North was experiencing an industrial revolution, transforming its economy and society. Factories were springing up in cities, bringing with them new technologies and ways of life. These factories, often bustling with activity, became the backbone of the Northern economy. They produced goods at an unprecedented scale, fueling both domestic markets and international trade. The North was also becoming increasingly connected by railroads and telegraph lines. These innovations shrank distances, allowing for faster communication and transportation of goods and people. In stark contrast, the South remained largely agricultural, with vast plantations dominating the landscape. Cotton was king, and the Southern economy was heavily reliant on this single cash crop. This agricultural system depended on the labor of enslaved people, who worked under brutal conditions to sustain the Southern economy. The institution of slavery was deeply entrenched in Southern society. The stark differences in economic and social structures between the North and the South created a deep and growing divide. These contrasting ways of life were not just economic but also cultural, leading to mutual distrust and misunderstanding. At the heart of the conflict was the contentious issue of slavery. The moral, economic, and political debates surrounding this institution were tearing the nation apart. In the North, abolitionists condemned slavery as a moral abomination. They saw it as a stain on the nation's conscience and demanded its immediate end. These activists organized rallies, wrote passionate speeches, and distributed literature to spread their message. Their efforts were met with both support and fierce opposition. Meanwhile, in the South, slaveholders defended slavery as an economic necessity. They argued that their entire way of life depended on the institution and that it was protected by the Constitution. Southern leaders often cited the Constitution to justify slavery, claiming it was a right guaranteed to them. This legal and ideological defense further entrenched the divide. The debate over slavery intensified with each new territory added to the nation. As America expanded westward, the question of whether new states would be free or slave states became a flashpoint. Both sides fought fiercely for control of these territories, seeing them as crucial to their economic and political futures. The stakes were incredibly high, and compromise seemed increasingly impossible. The nation was on a collision course, with each side determined to shape the future of the United States. The question of whether new territories would be free or slave states was not just a political issue, but a moral and existential one for the country. The issue of slavery was intricately intertwined with the question of states' rights. Southerners argued that individual states had the right to govern themselves. They believed the federal government had no right to interfere with their institutions, including slavery. Northerners countered that the Union was indivisible. They argued the federal government had a duty to uphold the rights of all citizens. As the nation expanded westward, the debate over slavery in new territories fueled tensions. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 and the Compromise of 1850 sought to maintain a balance between free and slave states. These compromises only served as temporary solutions. The issue of slavery continued to simmer beneath the surface of American politics. The 1860 presidential election proved to be a turning point in American history. It was a time of great tension and division within the country. The nation was grappling with the issue of slavery, and the election brought these tensions to a head. The election of Abraham Lincoln, a Republican who opposed the expansion of slavery, sent shockwaves through the South. Lincoln's stance on slavery was seen as a direct threat to the Southern way of life, which was heavily dependent on the institution of slavery. Fearing that Lincoln's victory would lead to the end of their way of life, 11 Southern states seceded from the Union. This act of secession was not just a political maneuver, it was a profound statement of defiance against the federal government and its policies. They formed the Confederate States of America, a new nation that they believed would uphold their rights and way of life. The formation of the Confederacy was a bold and unprecedented move, one that would have far-reaching consequences. The secession of the Southern states was a direct challenge to the authority of the federal government. It created a constitutional crisis, as the federal government had to decide how to respond to this act of rebellion. President Lincoln, in his inaugural address, declared that secession was illegal. He made it clear that he would not recognize the Confederacy as a legitimate government, and that he would take all necessary measures to preserve the Union. He vowed to preserve the Union, stating that the Union was perpetual and unbreakable. Lincoln's resolve set the stage for the conflict that was to come. On April 12, 1861, Confederate forces fired upon Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina. This attack was the culmination of months of tension and standoff between the Union and the Confederacy. This act of aggression marked the beginning of the American Civil War, a conflict that would last for 4 years and fundamentally transform the nation. The bombardment of Fort Sumter was the spark that ignited a war that would determine the future of the United States. The first major battle of the Civil War took place at Bull Run, Virginia, in July 1861. The Confederate victory shocked the North. It shattered any illusions of a quick and easy Union victory. The war in the East would quickly turn into a bloody stalemate. In the West, the Union Army achieved some early successes. Ulysses S. Grant captured Fort Henry and Fort Donelson in Tennessee. The Union victory at Shiloh in April 1862 gave them control of the strategically important Mississippi River. However, the Confederacy proved to be a formidable foe. They were determined to fight for their independence. The year 1863 proved to be a turning point in the war. In July, the Union Army, led by General George Meade, defeated Confederate forces under General Robert E. Lee at the Battle of Gettysburg. This 3-day battle, the bloodiest in American history, marked a turning point in the war. In the West, Grant's siege of Vicksburg, Mississippi, culminated in a Union victory. This gave the Union control of the Mississippi River. The Confederacy was cut in two. These victories gave the Union a clear advantage in the war. They boosted Northern morale and weakened the Confederacy's resolve. Leaders and Liberators. The impact of Lincoln, Grant, and Frederick Douglass. The Civil War produced a number of remarkable leaders. President Abraham Lincoln provided steadfast leadership during the darkest days of the war. His Gettysburg Address, delivered in November of 1863, eloquently articulated the principles for which the Union was fighting. General Ulysses S. Grant emerged as the Union's most capable military commander. He brought a relentless determination to the battlefield. Frederick Douglass, a former slave who became a prominent abolitionist, played a crucial role in persuading Lincoln to allow African Americans to serve in the Union Army. Beyond the battle lines, the Civil War's profound impact on civilians. The Civil War was not just fought on battlefields, it was also fought in the homes, farms, and factories of the North and South. Civilians on both sides endured tremendous hardships during the war. In the South, the Union blockade caused widespread shortages of food, medicine, and other essential goods. In the North, women took on new roles in factories and on farms. They filled the void left by men who had gone off to fight. The war also had a profound impact on the lives of African Americans. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued by Lincoln in 1863, freed slaves in Confederate territories. The price of unity, Reconstruction, and the long road to healing. The Civil War ended in April of 1865 with the surrender of General Robert E. Lee to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. The war had cost the lives of over 620,000 Americans. It had left the South in ruins. The period of Reconstruction that followed the war was marked by both progress and setbacks. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution abolished slavery. They granted citizenship and voting rights to African Americans. However, the process of reconciliation and rebuilding proved to be long and difficult. Legacies of the Blue and the Gray, the Civil War's enduring significance. The American Civil War was a defining moment in American history. It was a conflict that pitted brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor, and tested the very fabric of the nation. The war lasted from 1861 to 1865 and resulted in the deaths of over 600,000 soldiers, making it one of the deadliest conflicts in American history. It was a test of the nation's commitment to the ideals of liberty, equality, and democracy. The war challenged the United States to live up to the promises made in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. It was a struggle to determine whether a nation founded on the principles of freedom and equality could survive a civil war. The war settled the issue of slavery. It preserved the Union. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued by President Abraham Lincoln in 1863, declared that all slaves in Confederate-held territory were to be set free. This was a significant step towards the abolition of slavery and a turning point in the war. It also led to the expansion of federal power. The war demonstrated the need for a strong central government to maintain order and unity. The Reconstruction era that followed the war saw significant changes in the relationship between the federal government and the states, as well as efforts to rebuild the South and integrate formerly enslaved people into American society. The Civil War's legacies continue to shape American society today. The struggle for civil rights and equality that began during the war has continued through the decades, influencing movements for racial justice, gender equality, and more. The war's impact is evident in the ongoing efforts to address systemic racism and ensure equal rights for all Americans. The war's impact can be seen in the ongoing struggle for racial equality. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s drew inspiration from the fight to end slavery and sought to fulfill the promises of freedom and equality made during the Civil War. Today, activists continue to work towards a more just and equitable society. It can be seen in the debates over states' rights. The Civil War was fundamentally a conflict over the balance of power between the federal government and the states. This debate continues to shape American politics, with ongoing discussions about the appropriate roles and responsibilities of state and federal authorities. It can be seen in the very fabric of American identity. The Civil War forced the nation to confront its values and beliefs, and the outcomes of the war have become integral to the American story. The ideals of liberty, equality, and democracy that were fought for during the war continue to define what it means to be American. The Civil War serves as a reminder of the fragility of democracy. The conflict showed how deeply divided a nation can become and how important it is to work towards unity and understanding. It underscores the need for vigilance in protecting democratic institutions and principles. It serves as a reminder of the importance of preserving the Union. The sacrifices made during the Civil War were not in vain. They helped to create a stronger, more unified nation. The lessons learned from the war continue to resonate, reminding us of the need to uphold the values of liberty, equality, and democracy for future generations.